Welcome to Trial by Fire, an original podcast by Lexigate. In each episode, we sit down with women who built their own firms and redefined success on their own terms. Here's your host, Julia Hensel.
All right, welcome back to Trial by Fire. I'm Julia Hensel, and this is the show where we sit down with women who own their own firms, and we talk honestly about what it actually took to get there. So we talk about the wins, the fires, and everything in between. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ida Comerford, an attorney who I really respect and look up to, not just as a lawyer, but as a leader. And so thank you for joining me, Ida.
Julia, it's so good to see you. How are you? I'm so excited to be here.
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me. Well, Ida, I'm so excited to get to talk about your story today. And I thought perhaps we could start at the very beginning. So what was kind of the initial spark to your fire, so to speak? And when did you know you wanted to be a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually knew when I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 10 years old. I wrote a will to leave a soccer ball to my cousin. And so that was kind of the start of my whole legal career after that. I didn't really know anything about law. My father was a construction worker. My mother was a beautician. Neither one of them graduated from high school. But I kind of knew right away that I loved history, I loved politics, I loved rules. So I've always kind of been attracted to that. And I think for a lot of folks, I talk to young people today and they're going to school and they want to be a political science major. And I'm like, well, you're going to come see me in a couple of years because you're going to end up as a lawyer. So I think I just was attracted to that stuff early on.
That's very fun. Did anyone else get anything in your will other than the soccer ball, or that was just a single purpose will?
Yes. Yeah, there was no executor. It was a really poor example of a legal document, actually.
That's great. No, my dad is a lawyer, so I'm not a lawyer, but my dad is a lawyer, and he once loaned me $20 and had me write up some paperwork for that, and so he always wanted me to become a lawyer. But anyway.
Wow.
So then I would love to hear about the journey to law offices of Kenneth Hiller, and just what drew you there and what did you like about being part of that team?
Yeah, I didn't really have a really formatted notion of what I wanted to do to practice law. I think a lot of folks go to school and they think about, I want to be a civil rights lawyer or a constitutional lawyer, and we'd all love to do that. But the reality is, I think for a lot of us, especially a lot of us that don't have connections in the legal industry, we fall into our first job and then that's kind of where, we end up. And if you're a curious, interested person, you will like any job that you do as long as you're not really being abused by your boss, right? So, and that's kind of what happened to me. I found this really great firm doing estate work and I loved it. It was so much fun helping people through it sounds awful actually as I'm saying it, but helping these little old ladies through their most horrific moments in life and just sort of like stewarding them through. I remember this woman coming into our firm with all of her bills after her husband died, and she didn't drive. He drove her everywhere, and she didn't pay any bills or do anything with the money. And she said, I've gotten this notice now, they're going to shut off my electricity. And she didn't even know how to do stuff. And so, it was so human being to human being, and I've always been really attracted to that. I took a sort of a, I guess, some kind of personality test in third grade, and it said, I was going to do human welfare. And that scared me because I thought that meant like I was going to be on welfare. But the reality is I really was geared toward doing human welfare. So I started in that practice, and we moved to California shortly after I started that job. I had about 3.5 years in as a lawyer. And when we moved to California, I didn't have enough time in to wave into the bar in California. So I went to work as a deputy public administrator for San Diego County. It was such a cool job, but it was really kind of creepy because it was death scene investigation. And so, it was really neat. My job was when they pulled the body out of the house after they died, if they didn't have any family or relatives in California, a deputy public administrator would have to go in and actually like secure the estate and look for next of kin information and look for asset information. And so that ended up being a really, really cool job. I loved going into people's houses, and it was never the same day twice. There was always something really neat about it.
Yeah, so
So
you're
I did
essentially
that.
being an investigator for figuring
Yeah,
out, who the estate
yeah.
goes to. That's fascinating. I didn't even think about that as a job.
I know. They don't really have it in quite the same way in New York, and that kind of stung because when we moved back, about 5 years later, I didn't have that opportunity. But that's okay because by that time I had two kids and another one on the way, and so I decided to be a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years. So, do you have any kids?
I do not, no.
Okay, so 3 kids sometimes feels like 12. And so I was having like one really bad day with my kids, and they wouldn't put their shoes on, and the house was a wreck, and I was just sitting on the steps crying. And I saw this ad for an attorney doing Social Security law. And so I sent my application and applied for it. We used to apply back then on Craigslist. Do you remember Craigslist?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So I put my resume in on Craigslist, and I didn't hear anything for 6 months. And then they called me and they said, we still have that job opening. Do you have a job yet? And I was like, no, I wasn't really searching for a job. I just, had one bad day. And so I went in and did the interview. And I think if I had any competition, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job because there was this, I don't know if it was like a 2020 or a Dateline special that I had watched just before I applied that said, if you have any gaps in your resume as a woman, don't even bother. There's no chance, you're completely unemployable. You won't be able to get a job. And so I was really disheartened, but I went on, I think it was like divine providence. I went on this interview. I was probably the only applicant that didn't have a job 6 months later. And so I talked to Ken Hiller, who is our founding owner of the firm, and he interviewed me. And it was just so much fun talking to Ken. He was on a lot of commercials and a lot of billboards at that time. And so I basically just asked him all about, what it was like to be famous in Buffalo. And it was funny because he didn't think he was famous. So that was kind of funny because he just like had no self-awareness of that, that putting yourself on a billboard will have that effect. But we had a good time. And what was really cool about that is he told me all about Social Security disability law, and I really was super ignorant. That rule that you should like research the firm and research the type of law and make sure you're super educated before you go on the yeah, I didn't do that. It was terrible. So when I got to that interview, he was just educating me on what Social Security disability benefits were all about, and I had no idea. But I left there, I was so invigorated about like being a part of that practice area that I was just like praying, please let me get this job. And 3 days later, he called me and I got the job. And so I started with him as a hearing attorney. It was amazing. I put my oldest kid on the bus for kindergarten, and 2 days later, I went back to work.
Wow. And what an encouragement if there are other women who are listening who might be considering taking a career break or have taken a career break, to see how you were able to navigate back into that and also be able to land in a role that was a really great fit for you.
Totally. You know what? I would just say to my sisters, do not have anxiety, sisters. There's a special time in your life to do various things, right? And I had all these like experiences. I was supposed to have them with my kids. I wish I had a crystal ball so that I didn't have anxiety over, all the stuff they fill our heads with. You can listen to a podcast or, read an article and suddenly you're terrified that you're completely useless and unemployable. But do not worry about it. There's so many ways to get your skills back,
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that would be a great way to transition to talk about, where the firm is at now, where your name is part of the brand. It's now Hiller and Comerford, or Hiller Comerford. And so just talk a little bit more about that transition to becoming a named partner and what that means to you now.
Yeah, so I understand. I was listening to a podcast that you were giving the other day, and like you, I did not have like an organic, way of like becoming a partner. I bought the firm. I didn't start a company. You know what I mean? I didn't start my own firm. But what happened to me was pretty interesting. I started working as a hearing attorney and loved it. I found it super inspiring, and I felt like I could swear and smoke and drink because I was going to get into heaven one day just for all the work I did in getting people disability benefits. Like, you know, it was just so inspirational to be able to help people like that, you know?
Yeah.
So I just love my job. But over time, I think Ken came to trust me and rely on me as a sort of managerial figure. And I did that for a while without a title, just sort of helping with like hiring and firing decisions, some leadership and training, teaching decisions, and efforts. And then, you know, eventually I had a title. I was given the title of operations manager, which I think is supposed to be for someone who does computer-based work. So it wasn't really like an appropriate title at all, but it gave me some, it spoke to that I had some, you know, authority in the firm that, you know, other hearing attorneys didn't have, and some leadership. And then when COVID hit, I was doing a lot of teaching and training our attorneys by Zoom because we had just hired a new attorney or a couple of new attorneys in December of 19, and then COVID hit in March of 2020, and we were all from home, and it was just, you know, wow, you know, we had to kind of pivot really quickly. But over the course of those years, I think the thing that really set me up to become a partner was just that I was able to do a lot of the managerial tasks and that Ken could count on me. The things I didn't do at all were really had to do with like tracking KPIs and metrics, and that I still find that eludes me, and it's a really difficult thing. I don't know, like you have a more of a STEM brain than I do, but I'm more of a people person, not a numbers person, and so that's kind of I find that really the hardest part of the job. But the managing people part of the job, the leadership part of the job, I think was just kind of a natural fit. So one day Ken called me up and he said, you know, I'm thinking of retiring and I want to talk to you about a succession plan. He had a son who's a dear friend of mine who, you know, has always worked in the firm in different capacities. He wasn't really a hearing attorney. He started our veterans disability department, and then he started our personal injury department. And so he's kind of been off on his own ventures, and Ken wanted to sell the firm to, you know, folks who really were interested in carrying it through and who could run both sides, right? Like the veterans disability, the PI side, and then the social security side. And so it was kind of a natural fit that I could do that.
That's awesome. That's great. And it sounds like the managerial side of things has come really naturally to you. But I know as a people manager, there can always be difficult things as well. Have there been any kind of things that have been difficult to learn on the managerial side, or things that you feel like you've learned along the way about how to best lead and manage people?
The thing I would say to new folks out there looking to own a firm one day is take some business courses, take some management courses. Because when I started, when I got invited to become an owner, I had a pretty steep hill to climb. And so I started listening. I had a long commute. I had about an hour and 20-minute commute each way every day.
Wow.
So I started listening to podcasts. I think it was just like, you know, God giving me this opportunity to like be, you know, in the car for an hour and 20 minutes. What am I going to do? I used to listen to like how to learn Spanish tapes, but now I'm going to listen to, you know, so I listen to everything. I listen to how to run a lean law firm, you know, HR, you know, leadership concepts, you know, all of the managing people concepts. I listened to Brene Brown and Simon Sinek, and there are so many great, you know, mentors out there in the podcast space for learning how to run a firm. I bought books, you know, how to manage a law firm, Machiavelli for Women, you know, Law Firm Management 101. I mean, if there was a book out there I could buy or a podcast I could listen to, I just needed information quickly. I didn't know what a KPI was, and so I had to look that up, and, you know, we learned how to analyze some of our metrics. And, you know, I've really come to lean on Tim a lot. He's a super smart guy. And he has all the things that I don't have as his strengths. And so I think that we're a really good complement. So like he loves analyzing data. And of course I hate analyzing data. So that works out great. You know, he'll tell me the forecast for how many, you know, like what our intake in federal court is going to look like, how many briefs we're going to have to write in August of next year. And then I can go and hire the people, train the people. And, so it works out really well.
That's great. That's awesome to have another partner at the firm that really complements your skill set so well. And I feel like the list you just gave there was amazing gold, like lots of nuggets in there of things to listen to and explore. I'm personally a big Brene Brown fan, so I like that she got a shout out. One of my favorite quotes on leadership is "clear is kind." Because from Brene Brown, and I feel like I'm a Minnesotan, and so giving critical feedback is really, really challenging for me because I really like to say things very, very nicely. But I think I just love her clear is kind because, I need to remember that giving clear, direct feedback is honestly one of the most kind things you can often do for people. So.
We read a book. Tim actually read it first and then turned me on to it called Radical Candor. And I don't know if you've read it, but
yeah, Kim Scott or something.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing book. And again, I'm like you. I went to Catholic school and I was always taught to be, quiet and reverent. And so giving difficult feedback is very difficult for me. I like to not even sugarcoat anything anymore. I don't like to call it constructive criticism. I just want to call it criticism because I am going to have to criticize. I started this leadership group within the firm where all of our department leaders meet once a month and we sit around a table and we might listen to somebody like Brene Brown or Simon Sinek or one of them. There's so many. And we do an exercise or we learn about a concept and then we talk about how it's working in our departments or what we're noticing. It's a really cool way for me to get to know my people because we've grown a lot in the last, 4 years. And so it used to be that we were a firm of about 68 and now we're a firm of over 240 employees. So I don't know everybody anymore. And it's harder to know your close team leads. So this once a month leadership group that I run, just as an opportunity for all of us. And we call it like, it's like Las Vegas or like the cone of silence. Like, anything can be said in that room. Nothing is sacred, the space is sacred. Like you can say whatever you want and we can talk about any topic. And it's just been so great because my employees really value it and they can talk to me very candidly and I have to own a lot of stuff if something hasn't been performing the way it was supposed to perform under my decision making or my leadership. I have to own that and then we come up with a way around it, but it's been really great.
That's awesome. I'm curious, as you guys have scaled, because now you are over 200 people on the team, are there things that you've done to intentionally build culture, but now more at scale?
Culture is a really hard concept. It's easy to say, I want to have a good culture, and I'm sometimes in an ivory tower, right? Because I can say whatever I want, but the folks who are in those departments are the folks experiencing it. And so the two things I've really noticed that I have to do to make sure that it's, what I want for my employees is I want them to get out of their car every morning, to look at the front door of our building and to have the feeling that they can't wait to get into work. Right. And because I've had that feeling, I have that feeling here, but I've had that feeling at the public administrator's office in California, for the first time. And when I had that feeling, that's what I wanted for everybody that would ever work with me, right? So how can I make that happen? That's really the key. You can't just talk about culture in a vacuum. You have to think, what's going to make my people want to be in here, want to be, doing work. We have so much talent, right? Everybody that works for me that gets retained is like giving their talent to my company. I'm so grateful for that, and if I really am feeling that way, if I'm really grateful and I really want them to be happy here, I have to do stuff. I have to teach my team leads, you can't micromanage. You can't, correct all the time. They might be choosing a different technique than you, but really let's try to keep the correction to things that are just policy issues, right? And that goes for my attorneys as well. They might have a different technique for getting, for cross-examining an expert, but I have to let that go if it's not, if it doesn't harm the client, it's just a different way for them to phrase a question. I have to let that go, right? And so you have to give a lot of autonomy, and let people really, excel. But, so I have to set up a great situation where my people want to be here. And then the hardest part of it is that I have to excise the cancer. And that is hard. But if somebody is being toxic, if they're really, if they're just negative, if they're finding fault with everything, if they're complaining to their coworkers or getting folks riled up, that one person has a real chance to impact everybody on the team. So, we might do a corrective conversation and I've actually done some very candid conversations. One that comes to mind, I sat this woman down in my office and I said, you are a cancer to your coworkers. You're making everybody unhappy, and your outlook on life and the way that you talk is so negative. They're all miserable, and I bet you they're all putting their resumes out there to get different jobs because you're so miserable all the time. And she was shocked, and I was shocked that I let that come out of my mouth. But we still retained her. She still works for me today. I think she had no idea. She was in a spiral, and she had no idea.
Wow. To our point earlier of clear is kind, sometimes people just don't know and they need that clarity. And then it might sound like a very harsh thing to say, but that's what they need to get on what is now a very good path of, being a great teammate.
It's so amazing. There's so many things that I think my employees don't really recognize. Like, I had one gentleman start to work for me, and in his his first month with no training, out of training, he was doing about half the schedule, the amount of work of everybody else. And he didn't know that. He thought he was doing, a great job. And I said to him, you're doing 40 of these a month. Everybody else is around 95. So you're not really performing well. I think you have to let your employees in on the metrics. They have to know it, Yeah, even like answering the phone, I have three receptionists, and they have to know what's their incentive to answer the phone if there's 3 of them, right? Somebody else will answer it if they don't answer it. So you have to make it a little bit competitive. They have to know, well, Sally handled 400 calls, last month, and you handled, 125. And that's a shocker, but people need to understand where they rank. They need to know it. Absolutely. Nowadays, our younger people can improve. Right. How are they going to improve? Our younger people will come into a job and they ask that question. It seems like they're being taught. Have you noticed this at all? I don't know if you've done any hiring lately.
Yeah, we have hired a few people in the last couple of months, but I'm curious, what types of things are they asking?
They really want to know what is a good way to measure success, and how do you measure success in the first 90 days? And I think that's a really good question. I don't know if it's just a TikTok phenomenon that everybody's adopted, but it's a really good question. Like, did you know to ask that when you were starting out?
No, I never asked that. But what we do, we call it like a 30, 60, 90, where we actually share it in the interview process of like, this is what is going to be expected of you. And it's like an Excel spreadsheet in the first 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And what I found is very interesting is, it can feel intimidating to folks of like, because it's a pretty long list of here's what is expected, 30, 60, 90.
Here's the Excel list. Oh my God.
Totally, but people love it. And what I find is very interesting is it's obviously helpful for lower performers, right? Because they know, they're not on pace. But I actually found the really high performers also love it, because I think when you are a really high performer and you come into a new job, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to learn everything on day one, Yes. And it's you put a lot of pressure on yourself to, be running the first week. And so the 30, 60, 90 helps people realize, there is time, I am on pace, and let a little bit of that anxiety go, which can be overwhelming at first.
It is strange how some of my highest performers are also my highest anxiety folks, right? Like those are the folks that worry about how they're doing.
For sure. I've thought about that a lot. Like, is there a level of anxiety that fuels people? But
I know.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I have a little bit of anxiety that fuels me.
Too.
But also, I think if well channeled, and also, you have some therapy and emotional wholeness in other ways, it can be a good thing, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's a driver, totally. Yeah, I agree.
Well, talking about things that can increase stress and anxiety. In addition to your very busy job, you're also raising 3 kids. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what life looks like outside of work, and how do you protect that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've done a really great job of that actually. If we're gonna have, you know, um, time for deep dark secrets, I think I have a lot of regrets about my kids when they were little because I remember sitting at the computer at night, doing my work, getting ready for my hearings the next morning, and just asking them to go play or kind of sending them off to spend time with my husband. They don't have that same recollection, so I wonder if that's just burned into my brain. They seem to remember me as a really involved mom, so that's really good. But I still feel this mom guilt about, um, just having to bring home the work at night. I've tried to do some things to help my attorneys now. I have great attorneys that work for me, super, super talented group. And a lot of them have little kids, or older kids. I mean, they're in a lot of various times in their lives. But I have tried to limit their hearings a little bit more than we could limit ours back in the day. Back in the olden days when I was a hearing attorney, Ken was still growing the firm, and he, was kind of trying to make sure that we were always, competitive and, able to sustain ourselves. And so it was a little bit different than it is now. We're a really well-known brand, and we have a lot of cases coming in the door. And we have a great reputation in the community for handling our clients' cases really well. I'm super proud of the service we give our clients. So, being more established gives us a little bit more wiggle room to do things like limit our cases for our attorneys and, put time on their calendar so that they have more time to work during the workday and stuff. So I think we've done a better job of it now. But, life lesson, right? If I could, I don't want to look in the rearview mirror, but now I've got 3 kids that all are off to college. And so that's been exciting. We're kind of moving into this new time of life where we're about to be empty nesters, and we're just planning to go to all of our kids, sports, stuff in college, and probably be a pain in the butt to them. I don't even know.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. My husband and I have to find some new hobbies. We got some motorcycles a couple of years ago, so now we both ride.
Really?
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Where have you gone on long trips, or is it more like a day ride, or how have you been using your motorcycles?
Yeah, we did one really long trip. It wasn't really long compared to some of the folks we know, but we did one long trip to the Adirondacks and stayed over for a few days and went kayaking and did some fun things. But mostly we just kind of tool around on them like old people, I consider us a mixed marriage because I ride a Harley and he rides an Indian. So there's usually a big clash between the 2 groups, but, we get along just fine.
You've made it work. And then you can make any friends along the road because you
Right.
both have one of the bikes that they might be riding.
Right. If it's, yeah.
That's great. Cool. And I like what you were saying earlier about, it can be challenging. It sounds like it has been challenging in the past trying to integrate everything with trials or with court appearances and whatnot, and with your kids. But it sounds like you can't necessarily change things for yourself, but you can change things for the next generation of attorneys at your firm. And I think that that's really cool to try to limit things for them.
Yeah, and as much as I have regrets, I still live the life I wanted to live, right?
Yeah.
I was never going to go into school and be the mom who helped, be, tutor or stuff. I did go in, the classroom every once in a while and do a craft or do that. But that's about my level of, desired involvement. So, I did the things that were really motivating for me. I loved winning a case for a client. We would meet our clients in their worst moments in life, right? So somebody got sick or injured, and then their world starts to fall apart. They lose their housing, they lose their car gets repossessed. A bunch of my clients, I would say about 1 in 4 of my married clients lose their marriage during the disability process. It's so stressful and it's so broken. And there's no greater place to put your energy if you're motivated to do this job than to, like, put every building block in place to give them a strong claim and to help them win. So it was just really, it's an addiction, it's hard to walk away from that.
Totally, and very genuinely helpful for people. Are there
Yeah.
any particular client stories that stand out to you as some of the most meaningful ones that you've had?
Oh, I have so many of them. I represented a guy who became a friend of mine. Um, he had started a problem with his foot, like a foot fracture, which is a really weak case. But the fracture turned into a situation of complex regional pain syndrome, which is really all over body pain. And that happens sometimes when you get injured. Then you get like, I don't know if it's like a neuromuscular or some sort of, connective tissue disorder or something, but it sprung from this original foot injury. And it was pretty clear to me that the judge did not understand what he was dealing with at all. And she thought that he had a foot problem. And I had overwhelming evidence. I had 4 opinion statements from doctors. And that is like, those are like gold and they're really hard to come by. And so we prayed before we went into the hearing. We prayed together that, to let God just put the words into my mouth that I needed to be able to say. And at the end of the hearing, I could really feel that she was not on board. She was not going to approve this case. And so she said, anything further, counsel? And I said, may I close, Your Honor? And I just gave this closing statement that just recounted all of the evidence and, talked about how difficult it is to get a treating source statement, an opinion statement from this particular doctor, and how willing he was to go to bat for this guy, and how it wasn't just, a foot injury, but it had turned into this really severe connective tissue disorder that, is considered one of the most painful disorders in medicine. And at the end, I think she granted it. But I think I really kind of snatched victory from the jaws of defeat on that one. It's strange when the judge doesn't see it the way you see it.
Yeah, but to be able to share such a compelling closing statement, to be able to get such a meaningful verdict for your client that's amazing.
Yeah, I felt really good about it. He ended up winning, and then years later, his son came to me, and he had a terrible, terrible disease, and we were able to win for him too. It's really strange. I thought I was going to like representing living people way more than representing deceased people, because it just seems like, totally
You can see your client happy. Yeah.
You can see your client's outcome, and it's good.
Yeah.
But it was a real shocker my first year doing this, because I learned about diseases and medical conditions that I didn't even know existed. So it's shocking. The one thing that really bugs me today is, like, I'll go to a dinner party, or I'll go, with friends or something, and somebody will ask me what I do. And I'll say I'm a disability lawyer. I do disability. I get clients federal disability benefits. And they immediately go to this notion that everybody is lying and everybody is trying to scam the system.
Man.
It's really defeating, because I work so hard with people who are really, really severely injured. And if they saw what I've seen, I think they would have a totally different opinion. It just seems to come from kind of a place of ignorance, but, it's what you have to put up with.
Totally. Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess to close here, I'd just love to hear a few of your parting shots. So, as you know, a lot of the audience of the show is often women, and women thinking about law as a career path, or specifically starting or taking over a firm. And so I'm just curious, sitting where you are now with a very successful career underway, what guidance or advice would you give women considering this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have so much advice. I would say the most important thing is you have to be the hardest worker in the room. You have to be the smartest person in the room. Early on in my career, I was this young, I wore, short skirts with a suit, and high heels to court. And there were these old men on the other side of some of my cases, and they would just pound on the table and try to convince the judge with their bluster that they were right. And I learned pretty quickly that they did not know the law. And so I made it my business to really be armed with the knowledge of the law on my side. And when I would go into court, I would be able to recite the law, point for point, and talk about why my client's case was correct and their case was not. And for a while, it surprised them. They did not see me coming. They thought I was invisible. And I think a lot of them were kind of surprised. And it really set me up in that particular area of law in surrogate's court as someone not to be messed with. And so I've always kind of adopted that strategy that if you know as much as you can possibly know, research everything, learn everything, that you will at least have an even shot,
Yeah, I love that. It's like your hustle will pay off when people
Totally.
see the hard work and the research that you've done. I feel like that goes to any career path outside of legal as well, of just, working hard and knowing your stuff, and that will be irrefutable. So
Totally, yeah.
that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ida. This was really fun.
It's so fun, Julia. Next time we're going to have to let me interview you because I have so much I want to know.
Well, we'll do a part 2 down the road.
Sounds
All
good.
right. Thank you.
Take good care.